in the quiet hills of 14th-century Bohemia. Nestled between deep pine forests and frozen streams, there lay a small village named Dolny Vyesina. Life here was always hard, but it was life, and the people had learned how to work with the land and live with the seasons. Winters came every year like an old enemy, cold, silent, deadly, but this year, the frost came too soon. The Vrána family lived in one of the oldest cottages at the edge of the village. Jan Vrána, the father, was a woodcutter with strong arms and tired eyes. His wife Clara had once been the daughter of a merchant, but she had traded fine clothes for rough wool when she married Jan for love. They had 4 children: Jakub, 16 and already more man than boy; Eva, 13, quiet but clever; Matuj, 9, full of energy and always asking questions; and little Lida, just 4, with golden curls and a smile that made even the harshest days feel softer. The first frost arrived on October 10th, weeks earlier than expected. The villagers woke to a white world, their fields crusted in ice, the last of the cabbages ruined. The sky was gray, the air was still, and fear began to settle in like the cold itself. Jan stood outside his home, boots crunching on frozen grass, staring at the woods. He had chopped wood all summer, like he always did, but not enough. He knew it deep in his bones. Clara joined him. Too early, she whispered. He nodded. Too soon. The woodpile, stacked behind the cottage, was only half the size it needed to be. Jan had been forced to work for the local baron 2 weeks longer this year to pay a tax on sheep they no longer owned. That time lost had cost them warmth they now couldn't afford to miss. Jakub. Jan called inside the cottage. Get your boots. We go to the forest. Jakub came out with a heavy coat, already dusted with bits of wool. We'll need dry wood, father. The fresh ones won't burn right. I know, Jan said. We'll look near the edge. Maybe something's fallen. They walked in silence toward the woods. The snow was only a light layer, but it hid dangers, ice holes, or animal tracks. In the distance, the howling of wolves echoed faintly. Wolves always came early when winter did. As they walked, Jakub finally spoke. Will we have enough? Jan didn't answer. He couldn't lie to his son. Not now. Back in the cottage, Clara moved quickly. She checked the vegetables they had stored in the root cellar. The turnips looked fine, though they'd begun to shrivel. The onions were strong still, and the beans would last if rationed well. But the barley was low, and the salted meat barrel had only a third remaining. Eva sat on the wooden floor sewing patches into her younger brother's coat. Mama, she said, Lida's feet are cold. The wool socks are too small now. Clara nodded. We'll use the scraps from Papa's old tunic. It's rough, but it'll be warm. They were a clever family, the Vránas, poor, yes, but smart, resourceful, and united. That was the only way they'd survived this long. When Jan and Jakub returned from the forest that evening, they brought back a sled filled with dead branches, a few chunks of old bark, and some dry twigs. Jakub had a fresh cut on his hand, but he was proud of the work. Not much, Jan said, setting the pile down, but better than nothing. That night, they huddled around the hearth. Clara had made a thin stew, mostly water, with a few beans and one small piece of salted pork. Still, it warmed them. Jakub fed the fire carefully. Eva braided old cloth into a thicker blanket. Matish tried to play with Lida, but she was too cold to laugh. I can't feel my toes, she whispered, her little voice trembling. Clara scooped her into her lap and wrapped her in her shawl. You're warm now, sweet girl. Sleep. Dream of the sun. Days passed, and the cold deepened. November came like a hammer. Snow fell thick and heavy. The roof leaked in one corner. Jan used bits of leather to patch the hole, but the cold still came in. Other villagers came by, asking if the Vránas had extra salt or grain. Clara had to turn them away gently. Everyone was trying to survive. There was no room for charity now. But one day, old Mrs. Beulah, the widow who lived 2 houses down, came knocking. Her fire had gone out. Her wood was soaked. She looked pale and thin and near collapse. Jan invited her in. We'll share, he said, what little we can. That night, they shared their stew with her. They gave her one of their blankets, and though it meant fewer bites for each of them, the warmth of kindness added something the fire could not. We're not animals, Clara said softly. If we can't help each other, what are we? One night, as the snowstorm howled like an angry god outside, Jan couldn't sleep. He stared at the low burning fire, counting the logs left in the pile. Only 8 logs to last until spring or whenever the thaw would come. He rose quietly, wrapped himself in his thickest furs, and stepped outside. The snow reached his knees. The sky was black, but he had to check the traps he'd set in the woods. Rabbits, maybe a fox, anything, but the traps were empty. He knelt in the snow, exhausted, beaten, and whispered a prayer. Please, just let us live. Back at the cottage, Clara woke suddenly to coughing. Little Lida's chest was rattling. Her forehead was burning. No, Clara whispered, rushing to her. She placed cool cloths on her head, gave her sips of weak herb tea, and sang lullabies softly. Jan returned before dawn, face numb and hands stiff. He saw the fear in Clara's eyes. She's sick, she said. He held her close. "We'll keep the fire going. We'll stay warm. We'll keep her alive." Winter stretched on like a cruel joke. The sky never cleared. The sun, when it appeared, was weak and pale. Jakub helped his father every day, cutting wood from fallen trees, stacking it, drying it near the fire when possible. Eva learned to cook better, using almost nothing and still making it taste like home. Matej stopped asking so many questions. He learned silence, the way the world taught it, harsh and quick. Later, his fever lasted 6 days. On the 7th, it broke. Her smile returned, weak but bright. Clara cried in the corner where no one could see her. In mid-December, a traveler arrived in the village, a monk with frost-bitten fingers and a torn cloak. He brought news. Another village, not far, that had been lost to illness. A fever worse than fire, spreading fast. He warned everyone. Keep distance. Boil everything, pray. The villagers listened, but they also feared. Some families locked their doors. Others begged the monk to leave. The Vrána family took him in for one night, warmed him by the fire, and fed him soup. "You are brave," the monk said. "Brave and kind. You will survive. God sees you." On the darkest day of the year, December 21st, Jan fell while chopping wood. His leg twisted badly. Jakub had to carry him home. Clara splintered the leg. But it meant Jan couldn't walk for weeks. The weight fell on Jakub now. At 16, he became the man of the house. He chopped, carried, fetched, repaired. His hands blistered, but he never complained. At night, he sat quietly staring into the fire. Not a boy, not anymore. The winter solstice passed slowly, painfully. The days began to grow longer, but not warmer. January was colder than anyone remembered. The cold crept into their bones, into their dreams. But still, the Vrána family did not give up. They shared stories at night. Clara told tales of her childhood summers. Jan described the stars, even when clouds hid them. Jakub sang songs, old and deep. Eva drew pictures with charcoal on bits of wood. Matej carved a small bird from bone. Lida played with it for hours, smiling again. One night, when the snow was too heavy for even Jakub to fetch wood, they sat in the dark with only embers glowing. "Tell me again," Lida said, "about spring." And so Jan spoke, voice soft and slow. "There will be green again. The trees will wake up. The river will run like silver. Flowers will dance and the birds will sing. You'll run barefoot in the grass, and I'll lift you high so you can see the whole sky." Lida's eyes closed. She smiled, and for a moment, the cold disappeared. The wind changed. It wasn't just colder. It was heavier, sharper, the kind of wind that didn't just freeze the skin, but seemed to whisper things through the cracks of the walls. As if winter had grown a voice. In the Vrána household, the fire still burned in the hearth, but something had changed. The flames danced lower now. The woodpile had been halved again. Each log burned felt like a gamble, warmth now or warmth tomorrow. It was January 4th, and the village of Dolní Vrána had begun to shrink, not in size, but in spirit. 2 homes down. The Koenig family lost their youngest boy to fever. They didn't even ring the church bell. It was too cold to dig graves, and the ground had turned to stone. His body lay wrapped in linen near the family's hearth, waiting for a thaw. Everyone whispered of death, now not in fear, but with tired respect, like talking about the snow or the wind. It had simply become part of the season at the Vrána cottage. Jan still could not walk. His leg was slowly healing, but the pain returned every time he shifted. Jakub had taken over completely. He chopped the wood, he hunted when he could. He even traded a wooden spoon he carved for a pinch of salt from a traveling merchant. Jakub had become silent. His shoulders were broader, his face rougher. The boy was long gone. Clara worried for him. She had seen many things in her life, but what she feared most wasn't the cold, it was the quiet grief building in her son. He never cried, never sighed. He only stared at the fire like it held answers. "Come sit," she said one evening. "Let me clean your hands. I'm fine. They're cracked. It doesn't matter." He left before she could say more. Eva watched this happen every day. She didn't know how to fix it, but she felt the tension like smoke in the air. She began drawing again, this time pictures of spring fields, of bright suns, of smiling faces. Matej would sit beside her. "Is that Lida?" he asked one day, pointing at a stick figure with big curls. "Yes," Eva replied. "That's her, and you and Jakub were at the river. But it's frozen. Not in this picture. In this picture, it's warm." That night, the wind howled so fiercely that it tore loose a bundle of thatch from the cottage roof. Snow blew in through the hole, covering the floor with a thin layer of frost. By morning, Clara climbed up the roof herself. The next day, Jan couldn't, and Jakub was out. With numb fingers, she tried to pin the thatch back in place using ropes and small stones. The ladder wobbled. She slipped once but caught herself as she worked. She noticed something unusual, smoke rising from beyond the edge of the forest, not from a chimney, from the woods. That when Jakub returned with an empty trap and blue fingers, she told him what she saw. "Could be poachers," he said, "or bandits." He nodded. "I'll go look tomorrow." "No," Jan said from his place near the fire, his voice hoarse. "I'll go." "You can't even stand," Clara said firmly. But Jan's eyes were sharp. It could be someone else, someone worse. If they're near, we need to know. The next morning, against all warnings, Jan walked. Jakub helped him fashion a crude crutch. It took nearly an hour just to wrap himself properly, furs over wool over linen. By the time he stepped outside, the cold greeted him like a slap. He didn't make it far, only halfway through the field before a figure emerged from the woods. It wasn't a bandit, nor a poacher. It was a woman. Her coat was torn, her boots wrapped in rags, her cheeks red from cold. She dragged behind her a sled with what looked like a child bundled in blankets. Jan called out. She froze. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. She hesitated, then walked forward. Slowly. "My name is Jan," he said. "That's my home there." "I saw the smoke," she replied. Her voice cracked. "We've been walking for days. Come now before your child freezes." The woman's name was Teresa, and her son was named Philip. He was 7, sick with a cough, and barely conscious. They had come from a town to valleys over horny hornets which had been struck by both fever and fire. Half the village had burned after a chimney collapsed during a storm. The survivors scattered. "We walked through the pass," she said, sipping warm broth Clara handed her. "I didn't know where else to go." "You're safe here," Clara said gently. Jakub stared at the boy, seeing a shadow of Matuj in him. "We don't have much," he muttered, "but we'll share." Teresa looked at him. "You have more than most days past." The boy slowly improved. Lida took to him immediately, curling beside him at night. The house felt fuller, warmer, even if the cold was worse, but food ran low. By January 10th, they were boiling bones for broth. "We need more," Clara whispered to Jan. "We have nothing left to trade." Jakub listened from the door. He said nothing, but early the next morning he was gone. He returned late in the evening with a sack of grain and a wrapped cloth bundle. "Where did you go?" Clara demanded. He didn't answer. "What did you trade?" Jakub looked at his mother. "The silver spoon." "Grandmother's." Clara's face softened, but her voice cracked. "You shouldn't have." "I should," he said. "It's just a spoon." That night, they ate better than they had in weeks. Porridge with honey, bread with herbs. Even Philip, pale and thin, smiled. But Jakub didn't eat. He stared at the fire again, quieter than ever. On January 17th, a new storm arrived. It lasted 3 days. The wind shrieked like a beast. Trees snapped. Snow piled up to the windows. The fire barely stayed lit. Eva woke in the middle of the night on the second day to find her mother awake, staring at the door. "There's something outside," Clara whispered. Eva pressed her ear to the wood. Crunching. Heavy. Too heavy for snow. Jakub took the axe and stood guard all night. Nothing came in. But when the storm passed, they found animal prints circling the house. Wolves. The village had changed. 3 more people had died. Most homes stayed shut. The church bell stopped ringing. But still, the Vrána family endured. Every day was a test. Every hour a small war. But the fire never fully died. And even when the wind blew through the cracks, even when the bones of the house groaned under snow and age, the family held each other every night. They whispered memories of spring. On the last day of January, something strange happened. The sun appeared not warm, but bright, blinding, a sky of blue, clear and endless. The snow sparkled like crushed diamonds. Clara opened the shutters wide. Everyone stood, blinking, unsure if it was real. Jakub stepped outside. He raised his arms. The light kissed his skin. Matuj ran out barefoot, laughing for the first time in weeks. "Spring?" Ida asked. "Not yet," Jan said, smiling, "but it remembers us." The sun had returned, but it did not bring mercy. It fooled them, just for a moment, into believing the worst had passed. The bright sky, the glistening snow, the laughter of children running outside, it felt like the beginning of change. But hope is a dangerous thing when winter still holds the world by the throat. By February 1st, the cold had returned, sharper and more violent than before. But this time, it wasn't the cold that was killing them. It was hunger. The Vrána family had rationed carefully. Every grain, every root, every scrap of fat had been stretched beyond logic. They boiled the same bones over and over, hoping to pull out just one more whisper of flavor. The woodpile was shrinking. So were their bodies. Jakub's shoulders, once strong from chopping and carrying, now looked hollow, his collarbone pressed against his skin like a ridge. Ava's eyes were sunken, her braids thinner. Matuj no longer played or asked questions. He just sat near the fire and stared. Lida had stopped smiling, and Clara, she had begun to hide food from herself. She would take the smallest portion, tell her children she was full, and go lie down with her back turned so they wouldn't see her tears. Jan, still recovering from his injury, had tried to fast completely for 2 days. "I've lived long," he told Jakub quietly. "The little ones haven't." Jakub had stood there, fists clenched, jaw tight. "Don't say that." But in his heart, he feared the same. The only one with any strength left was Teresa, the woman who had arrived from the forest weeks ago, with her sick son. Philip had recovered, mostly though thin and coughing, but Teresa had become something else in these past weeks. Fierce, silent, determined. She spent her days foraging along the edges of the forest, wrapped in furs, a dagger on her belt, She returned sometimes with nothing, sometimes with twigs and pine needles. Once with a handful of dried mushrooms she claimed were safe. She said they helped her people during the famine. Clara had been suspicious, but they boiled them, tasted them cautiously. They didn't die. On February 5th, Jacob made a decision, a dangerous one. He would go beyond the village, past the known trails, toward the ruins of an abandoned monastery deep in the hills. There, he had heard from passing traders, wild goats sometimes wandered. They fed near the old stones, and if he could bring one down, they would live. At least for a few more weeks. You'll die out there, Clara said firmly when she heard his plan. Then I'll die trying, Jacob replied. Jan shook his head. Let me go with him. You can't even run, Father. Eva stepped forward. I'll go with you. No, Jacob said gently. You're needed here. He left the next morning, before sunrise, carrying a short bow, 3 arrows, a rope, and a pouch with the last piece of smoked meat for energy. The wind was still. The trees stood silent. The world felt like it was holding its breath. Clara watched him vanish into the white. She didn't speak. She only held Lida close and prayed. Meanwhile, inside the Vrána home, rations ran out. No more porridge. No more beans. The root cellar was bare. The cheese was gone. The salted pork just a memory. They boiled bark, pine needles, thin soup that tasted like nothing. Eva had begun to feel dizzy when she stood too fast. Matuj fainted once while carrying, in a small log. Clara caught him, held him, but he didn't cry. He just said, I'm fine. Philip began coughing again. Jakub, meanwhile, moved like a shadow between trees. The snow was deep, past his knees in places, but he was strong, and he had purpose. His fingers were numb, his stomach screamed, but he walked for hours, stopping only when he found shelter under a frozen ledge. He reached the monastery ruins by nightfall. And there under a dead tree he saw them, 3 goats. Wild, nervous, hungry, he crouched behind the stones. The bow in his hand trembled, not from fear but from weakness. He had 3 arrows. Only 3, he whispered to the wind. Let one be enough. The first arrow missed. The goats bolted, but one stumbled. Jakub ran fast. Desperate, he aimed again. Second arrow, it struck but too shallow. The goat cried out. It limped toward the trees. Third arrow, he aimed. He didn't breathe. It hit. The goat fell. He collapsed beside it, sobbing not from sorrow, not from guilt, but from relief. He had done it. Jakub returned 2 days later, dragging the carcass behind him on a makeshift sled. His face was pale, his lips cracked, but he was alive. When the family saw him coming through the fog, Matuj shouted so loud it echoed across the village. Clara ran barefoot into the snow. Jakub fell to his knees. They wept. The goat saved them. They used every part, the meat, the bones, the fat. Clara even used the skin to line Lida's shoes. Teresa boiled the stomach to make a thick stew. Jan carved the horns into hooks to hang their tools. They were warm. They were full. Not for long, but long enough. But still, February has a way of crushing hope. 3 days later, Matuj woke with a rash, red spots across his chest, a fever, 10 Eva, 10 Lida. It was not cold that had come for them now. It was sickness.